Quiet.
Good evening.
Silence your phone.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have a great group of individuals here to talk about honoring truth, Indigenous representation in media, education, and public discourse in the era of Americans, which, as many of you know, is the traveling Smithsonian exhibit that is currently at the Watkins Museum downtown. That is the first planned stop in the state of Kansas, and that is in conjunction with the Haskell Cultural Center and Museum. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Eric Anderson, and I'm on the faculty in Indigenous American Indian Studies program here at Haskell. I will be moderating our discussion tonight. A reminder, please silence your cell phones or other audible devices so that we don't have distractions. We have a large panel, as you can see, which is great. We're lucky to have so many voices and different kinds of expertise to talk with us tonight. Because we have so many folks and we want to hear as much as we can from each of them, there's a predetermined set of questions. So that's what we're going to stick to as a script. And I'm guessing, maybe I'm assuming on the part of the panelists, but if you want to follow up afterwards, my guess is they will generously entertain questions or comments that you have. So let's begin by having introductions, and I will start here to my right with Professor Jimmy Beeson, and then you can pass along the microphone.
My name is Jimmy Beeson, faculty with Indigenous American Indian Studies Department here at Haskell. I'm also a Haskell alum, so thanks. Osage Nation, whichever.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Allison Levering. I come from the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. I'm a third-year student here at Haskell Indian Nations University, studying media communications, and I've been a part of an internship up at KU. Had the honor to serve as a news anchor for a television program, student-run, called Good Morning Indian Country, and I also am the editor-in-chief for the Haskell newspaper, the Haskell Indian Leader newspaper.
Hello, my name is Rada Lavado. I am Acapulco Pueblo from Acapulco, New Mexico. I am one of the founders of Not in Our Honor, which actively protests against the Kansas City football team to change their name and stop the chop.
Mackie Moore, member of Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and interim president here at Haskell Indian Nations University.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Wildcat, and I am a Zoya-Ha-Yuchi member of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma, sometimes referred to as Creek Nation. Longtime Haskell faculty member, sometimes administrator. My joke is I've been every position there is at Haskell at some point in time, but they've never allowed me to be dog catcher. I think that was above my pay grade, right?
My name is Alex Redcorn, citizen of the Osage Nation, and my introduction is not nearly as cool and traditional as Jimmy's. I'm a director of Indigenous Studies at the University of Kansas and Associate Vice Chancellor of the Office of Sovereign Partnerships and Indigenous Initiatives.
If you didn't guess, I'm Navajo. We have long introductions. That was not all of it. I'm Melissa Peterson. I work at the University of Kansas as an assistant research professor, something I just recently started, but have worked at the university for 10-ish years in student support services. Haskell brought me to Lawrence, Kansas.
Great, thank you all so much. We have a wonderful cross-section of Indian country represented here tonight. And I would be remiss if I didn't say I'm here representing Citizen Potawatomi Nation as well. So let's go ahead and begin our questions. And I think if it's okay, we'll start down on the end there, Melissa, with you. and then each of you can build on or go a different direction if you want with your answers. Since our theme is representation, the first question is, how does inaccurate representation harm Native American individuals and communities? And maybe you have an example that you'd like to share.
As a Native person growing up on the reservation and coming to mainstream higher education to teach, there's lots of examples, but I'll just quickly start with an example and go to what I'm doing right now. When I was playing volleyball about 7th grade, we were an all-Native volleyball team playing against other non-Native people, usually white people. And in the stands, one of the parents kind of made a comment and in a joking way. It was like, it's the Indians versus the Cowboys. And you know, for a 7th grader, it kind of was like, took me back a little bit. It did hurt a little, but it also kind of fired something in me as an athlete to be like, yeah, and the Indians are gonna win today. So that's just a quick example, but today I actually had my class we're teaching a class at KU, American Indian Culture, through the Res Dogs TV show. And unfortunately, most of my students, all freshmen, have never learned or had accurate depictions of Native American people, so we're trying to flip that narrative. But it definitely does play into a lot of stereotypes, and I know some of these folks can share a little bit more about that as well, because that's what we see all the time.
Are we going down the line or going?
Good.
All right. So for me, I think about representation in school systems. And so I went to KU. I graduated from high school in the Kansas City area. My hometown is Haskell, Oklahoma, but I spent a lot of my life going back and forth between the Kansas City area and Haskell. And so we developed that kind of stereotypical walking two worlds kind of mentality, which I now think is a gross oversimplification, but we'll get into that later. But when I went into social studies education, and I started learning how to teach social studies, and then I went out into the world and became a social studies teacher, and I started teaching the social studies in a very Eurocentric way because I did what I was taught how to do, even when I was spending my life kind of going back and forth and still engaging in Osage community, Osage ceremonies, Osage culture. That was still a central part of my identity. And so I think the power of understanding that I started recognizing that I went through school systems, learning such narrow stereotypes and misunderstandings that I started to recognize how the systems had trained me to think about things and how I started questioning those systems. And so I come at the concept of representation and experience and self-identity around the idea of going through systems to learn how to become an educator and then replicating those things and then understanding, oh wait, I thought I was actually disrupting status quo, but I really wasn't, until we started going a little bit deeper and a deeper dive into our own experiences within education. And even starting to question the term education itself. And what is education, and how do we always think of it as like curriculum, K through 12 schools, and we don't zoom out and think, what are we learning in ceremonies as educational systems? What are we learning in other things that aren't brick and mortar schools with desks and the stereotypes of what the American educational system is?
Yeah, I could build on, what Alex and Melissa have raised. I mean, I think the challenge that we have is that a lot of the representation, early 20th century through the mid 20th century, and I guess for most of the 20th century, I think perpetuates primarily a kind of homogenous and really a very racialized view of who Native people are. And I think that's really the kind of racialized thinking that is so prominent in the United States, particularly right now, is really one of our tremendous weaknesses. I know that, growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I started school in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My father had been trained as a typesetter at the Chilocco Indian Boarding School. When he got out of the Marines, applied the skills, and he knew how to be a typesetter. And one of his jobs when I was a young child was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so I started school there. And I remember to this day, you know, in kindergarten, the kinds of crazy activities they do, you know. First of all, we never talk about Native people until Thanksgiving. And of course, that's the Native holiday. And so we get out the colored paper and told to cut out headdresses. And it, you know, it was really disconcerting because, you know, I have a lot of Yuchi relatives, most of them living in Tulsa or Sapulpa, and I never saw them wear a headdress. And so I was, you know, 5 years old, I'm going like, you know, what is this deal? And I remember bringing, you know, that stuff home, you know, to show my mom and dad. And I remember my dad just laughing and saying, yeah, I said, ignore that. He said, these people just don't understand that, you know, we've got so many different tribes, different traditions, you know. My dad's oldest brother, Jimmy, he married a Pawnee, and so, you know, I knew that Pawnee liked to go to powwows. My cousins were all real good powwow dancers, but my Yuchi relatives didn't go to powwows, you know, they're dancing at night. And I thought, wow, this is really strange. And, but I became very aware of the fact that when I was growing up, I think it's changing. I hope it's changing. I don't know, I'm not a social media guy. I hope it's changing because of, you know, young people using social media, young Native people. But I would say the biggest challenge, you know, that we have even still currently is that too many people think of tribal peoples racially. They have a very racialized view of the world, and they tend to not understand the incredible cultural diversity that exists among the first peoples of this land.
Yeah, it's a big question. You guys have said a lot, but I think one of the things is growing up, it kind of compounds it too with the fact that I'm Cherokee and we kind of get a lot of stuff thrown at us as jokes. But when it comes to the fact of who you are, you know, what is my culture, what is my language, and taking a personal interest in that and learning that, going out to our grounds, whether it's Cherokee Nation. I spent many years under the Muskogee Nation working for them and learning a lot of things from them. And coming to Haskell, you know, I grew up in Oklahoma around all these different tribes, 39 tribes in Oklahoma, so I was always around them, but coming to Haskell, man, there was so much more diversity, so many more tribes, different things to learn about. And I always tell people, you know, that was the first time, you know, I was ever invited into a sweat lodge, all these different things, and it was like, you know, it opened my eyes to make me understand that just like he said, every one of our tribes has different cultures, right? And so my biggest thing is like, you know, taking up opportunities to educate people. You know, space and place is an important thing. If I ever get asked to come to a school and present, I think that's a thing I have to do because I want to tell them what my personal, where I come from, what my tribe's about, you know, because if I allow somebody else to tell it, there's no telling what's going to end up happening. You know, all of us Cherokees are driving around in Jeeps or something, you know, so I'm gonna tell my story, right? And I think that's one of the things from an educational standpoint is that we got to put ourselves out there to be the person who corrects these misconceptions and educates people and be proud of who we are, stand up. And I see a lot more of that, like you said, with social media and stuff, but and, you know, some people are out there pushing it more than others, and that's the thing that I think, you know, from my standpoint is how do I contribute to that? And I think it's through educating people and letting them know I'm proud of who I am. Here's the other people, the differences in our tribes, the uniquenesses of it. You know, because every one of them is beautiful, and I think that's something that is really cool that I get to learn about. So I'm honored that I get to be around so many different tribes and learn from them. Thank you.
I think growing up and then coming here, I'm from the Southwest, and so coming to see so many Plains tribes, you know, that you're not in touch with when you're in the Southwest, it's kind of a big impact. But also the misrepresentation of who we are as a people. Even Haskell, you know, with our imagery, with the Indian head, represents Plains people, does not represent my people from the Southwest, does not represent coastal people. So what would be, you know, something that represents all of our Haskell community? But also just being from, you know, in this part and coming into this area, did not realize that I would be impacted by a football team and having to deal with a child that is played on numerous commercials, on television, on the radio, people walking in the streets, and deciding to take that on as a college student, and we're still doing it 20 years later. You know, it's like an educational point for me to try and educate others on why we do this. But it's also very difficult because we have to face not only, you know, non-Native people who get upset with what we do, but we also face Native people who get upset with what we do. So, you know, you choose your vices, I guess, and so that's why I do it, is to educate people, because it does not represent who I am, it does not represent the many Native nations that come to the school, and I think that's important.
So for me, ever since I came to Haskell, I started Haskell straight out of high school. I attended in the summer semester, excuse me. And so all of the education that I've learned about what representation is for Indigenous people has been taught to me probably by most of the people in this room right now. And so that's what makes Haskell really special for me. Not a lot of people in town, and this is really surprising to me, not a lot of people that live in the city of Lawrence even know that Haskell exists here, right on 23rd. We're very overlooked in that way. And I feel like that's an aspect of, you know, this representation that has been, you know, the misinformation that's spread throughout the media, and the portrayal of the Hollywood Indian in media, and how that stemmed, you know, all these different things in the media. And I just think it's really important that we break that stigma and create our own things and be very creative with our own works of media, and not be afraid to be seen, not be afraid to have different ideas. So yeah.
Just more.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. It's been a while. Repeating the question, it took a while to get down here, so, you know, in what ways does inaccurate representation harm Native American individuals and communities?
Just speaking from my own experience, I think inaccurate representations and stereotypes, going through life, learning to navigate conversational landmines. You're always waiting for somebody to ask the question. You're always waiting for that comment. You're always waiting for the woo. You know, and I'm not saying that happens these days so much. I think it was more like growing up in school and blue-collar work sites I used to be at, literally getting into fights or almost about ready to get into a fight. Because you feel like you always need to defend yourself. You always feel like you need to stand up for yourself. You always feel like, you know, you can't just go through life or what have you, just going through your day in certain areas, like at work or school or what have you. So I think the inaccuracies and the stereotypes, when it comes down to harm, it can lead to a sense of bullying, physical harm, always creating this kind of hyper-awareness of your engagement with other people, talking about Native issues and kind of, you know, ready for my grandma's Cherokee, you know, days, waiting to be that guy who has the answers for that, or waiting to be, you know, like mocked in some way, right? So I think to me, it was always about like, because growing up in Oklahoma, it was like that, right? There was just this, this kind of really closed-mindedness of certain things. And, you get, picked on or something, or, oh, you look Mexican, oh, you're Indian, So they'd have an insult for everything, right? They'd have an insult if you're Mexican, or if you're not, they got, you're a wagon or whatever. And words lead to actions, unfortunately, you always have to end up standing up for yourself. And I think that's always the issue to me, is like always having to be on alert. I mean, I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but it's always kind of there under the surface sometimes. And as I've gotten older, a lot of those places I was at, like I said, and like, you think about like blue collar racism being a real thing. And then when you get older and become a family man, become a teacher, whatever, some of that goes away, but it still sticks with you, those experiences that you had with people growing up. So you learn to be kind of like defensive, right? And I think that just creates almost an unhealthy thing, like, man, I can't just talk about this. We're always looked at one-dimensional, just these one-dimensional beings that, there's no accurate representation. If there is, it's a goofy person in a headdress, or Casey Chiefs, or, the land raiders or what have you, right? So to me, it just leads to a sense of like being on the defensive a lot, and it can become kind of tiring having to navigate that. So that's my thought.
Thank you. So some of you started to address this already with talking about things like education, and perhaps the hope, at least, that some of these things have begun to change, but also the recognition that maybe sometimes they haven't. So let me flip the question around a little bit, and we don't have to go back in reverse order. We can do this however you want. So maybe just raise their hand, I'll bring the microphone to you. But what does accurate representation look like then? What does accurate representation mean to you as a tribal citizen? I suspect you'll have different perspectives on that. Somebody want to take that first? No? No, we don't.
I think accurate representation is, again, that's where we as tribal members and people, we have to step into those spaces that are uncomfortable for us and educate people on who we are, tell our stories, tell our history. I think that's one of the things I've seen in the just recent few years is people starting to write textbooks that are actually accurately based by Native Americans. And it's going to take more stuff like that that's going to have to be developed to put into those spaces. Because of the years and years of misrepresentation of history, of who we are, even in the state of Oklahoma, where again, I say there was 39 tribes growing up. In our Oklahoma history book, it only addressed the Plains Indian tribes. And I'm like, where am I at? I live here too, and that's kind of the ridiculousness of it, but it's like, how do we make it better? We can't sit on our hands and wait for other people to tell our stories and make it accurate and do it. We have to do it. And I think that's one of the reasons why this institution is so important, is because we need young people to get educated, to go out and to help us to represent who we are and defend who we are. That's really a sad thing to be able to say in today, where we're at today, but we're still defending who we are. We're still educating people on who we are. And, I think, that to me, that's the most important thing, is like, how do we change this? How do we accurately portray ourselves? We be part of the solution, right? Everybody knows it's a problem. It's been a problem forever. But this is the solution, is education and us being the educators. And so that's my thoughts.
I'm going to talk about this before Uncle Dan does. So, if you ever hear Dan talk, he likes to talk about Vindaloria and something called power in place, and the idea that power in place equals personality. And I was a doc student studying, not with Dan, and I'm like going around trying to figure out, and I see this YouTube video of Dan talking about this, and I had read the book, but I hadn't gravitated towards that in such a way, and I thought, okay, I need to start paying more attention to that. The point being, like, I think accurate representation is a refusal to generalize, period. And to just understand that literally every community is coming from a different place-based understanding of the world, and even within those communities, I always joke about, like within the Osage community, Haskell District and Balsulian District and Zonzaline District all have a different personality when you really get down to it. So not even all Osages are talking the same. And when we talk about, like, Rhonda's talking about, like, even natives coming at you, like, natives don't agree on everything. And so the refusal to oversimplify is the starting point. What is accurate representation? One of the biggest things, because remember I'm coming from an education systems point of view, one of the biggest things is recognizing that our educational systems were built around the priorities of settler colonialism. And while places like Haskell were intended to assimilate, and Carlisle and Chilocco, over time, they've been kind of reclaimed and repurposed in a way. And what has happened is you start getting Indians making decisions for Indians, about Indians, in those systems. And so to me, in modern context, what really started motivating me, because I told you that I spent a lot of my life moving back and forth from Kansas City to Oklahoma, Haskell, Oklahoma. I always had this in my head, like, you know, back home, like, they're getting a totally different educational experience, but here I am in the Kansas City area getting this experience. And then I read the statistic that over 90% of American Indian kids are actually in public schools and not BIE schools, which all of a sudden opened my eyes to the fact that, oh, holy crap, 90% of kids are being mandated English for 12 years. They're given access to Spanish, French, German. They're being mandated U.S. history, the state of Kansas history, U.S. government, and there's not a mechanism in most communities, some have it, to learn their own language, culture. There's no Osage Nation government class required in Oklahoma. And so when you start realizing those things, to me, representation, in the work that I do a lot, I like to talk about Indigenous education for, about, and with Native nations. We're in the curriculum, we're talking about, natives are in these classrooms, but how can we start building systems and curriculum with natives so they're in those systematic decisions?
Yeah, this is really a great topic, and it can get complicated very quickly. But the one thing I would say about that we're still lacking very much, and I know many of you are probably sorry, like myself, that you know, the best contemporary representation we had of some Native people was situated in Oklahoma, and very popular. Unfortunately, it's not continued, but reservation dogs, and I think that, to me, that was accurate, because you knew of the place, you understood the jokes, because you had to be from that place to kind of get some of those jokes, although some of them translate to other, you know, Native situations and communities. And I think that, you know, that really is one of the weaknesses we have today. When people think, and our education promotes this, when people think of us, they don't think of people that are sitting up here. They think of my ancestors 150 years ago, and how they were dressed, and how they lived, and, you know, the real Indians. And I'm going like, I'm sorry, you know, the real Indians are still here, you know. And I think this is one of the challenges that I know. We've got a lot of really bright young people here that are getting engaged in the media, want to make films, want to do, you know, their own productions. And I think that's going to be so crucial, because that's how we can kind of bring us to today because this is again, another, I think, problem we have. We still have a lot of people, and I don't mean to be dismissive of people's interests, okay? But I wish we had as many people here tonight from the Lawrence community as that are gonna turn out for our powwow. But they wanna come to the powwow because they wanna see the beads and the feathers and, you know, that's real Indian culture. But we got real Indian culture right on this stage. This is what we do, this is our work, and you know, it's really exciting, good work. But so that's my two cents worth. I mean, I think accurate representation is woefully lacking still in the media when it comes to showing Native people today, right now. And, you know, maybe there's going to be another show in the offing that's going to come up and address that.
Excuse me. I think to me, looking at accurate representation means it can be a challenge because we as a people, we need to have an accurate understanding of who we are too. And what I mean is, because of colonization, cultural erasure, boarding schools, many in our community have been disconnected from a lot of those teachings. And we're still trying to get reconnected with that. So if we have a hard time understanding who we are, how are we going to accurately convey that, right? So I think the challenge is how do we, as a people, try to understand the best we can about who we are, and taking the time and effort to pursue that knowledge, right? Excuse me, sorry. So I think that's the challenge, is how do we get accurate historical representation, accurate cultural information about who we are. And that can be challenging too, because you talk to one person, they have a whole other idea about who our people are, talk to another person, or you might be like 4 different tribes, like not only Osage, but Seminole, Creek, Cherokee, UKB, I gotta make that distinction. So there's all these different layers to that, and I think, so I'm kind of putting it back on us too, as a people. We need to really invest in that, especially with young folks who have an opportunity to learn about that, so that you can accurately give that information out, right? So, that's mine.
I like what Jimmy said there, and it's very true. It's also, I feel like when you ask this question, and in my head, it's not trying to answer the question directly, but it's like, how do we then work these systems that Dr. Redbar talks about so that we can get that end result that we're trying to find? And that's kind of, I feel like, been my whole game of life. I grew up on the Navajo reservation. Every day I learned, I knew, we were doing our culture. Like, we had to take Navajo culture and Navajo language in order for graduation to happen and to earn scholarship. So I was in all of that, and then I went off the reservation to go to school. And the whole goal, right, is to become educated so that you can give back to your people. Even though my grandparents went to boarding school, they still wanted me to get that education. So now I feel like not only understanding who we are will be helpful in that, but also being in the spaces, being at the table. And it's hard to get there sometimes, but working towards that. And so when you are in those spaces, when the people know you and they know who you are as a Native person, then they have to think about it. Otherwise, no one ever thinks about it. It's not in your algorithm, if you want to talk social media. And aside from that, when you're thinking about being in these spaces and other people, you know, thinking about who you are, well, I lost my train of thought that I was trying to share. But for the most part, that's a big part of it, is ensuring that the Native voices are there, And we always get requests from organizations or cities that are trying to do work for Native people, and they want to do it with Native people, but they don't want to hire Native people. And so it'd be really important to have those perspectives in the room, being hired to do the work. We have a lot of great Native people, Native youth that are coming out of our educational systems, and especially here in Lawrence, we get a lot of folks that come to Haskell and stay in the town because we enjoy it. So I think hiring Native people and getting them in the room instead of asking for that free labor, which we do take it upon ourselves to do because of trying to educate and make sure that we're depicted or we're included in the work that's happening.
Rhonda or Allison, do you want to fill the question? No?
So representation looks different to everyone. There are over 500 tribes, not even including the unfederally recognized tribes. And representation can mean a lot of different things, but the way that I think of it is how the young people see ourselves. What kind of value do we hold to being Native? For a lot of us, we don't really see too many Native people, especially the ones that come from like the cities, the urban areas. They don't have those opportunities like I did to attend a tribal school and to learn their tribal language and see what their people and their strengths look like. They don't know the traditional values that come with living as a Native person in this modern day. So I think it takes a whole village to really show your children and this younger generation that we're strong people and that we matter, and not all of us, will choose the bad path in life. Not all of us will fall to this system that has been set up to fail us. So I think just good role models really help shape our next generation to have Native pride and to represent themselves in their best way and put their best foot forward in everything they do. And I feel like that's accurate representation, is to be yourself wholeheartedly.
Great, thank you. You have this uncanny ability to kind of anticipate where I'm going with my next question, so that's pretty cool. You've already started to get at some of this next inquiry. You talked about things like the Hollywood Indian film and colonization aspects like boarding schools, or the lack of maybe institutional support in our public school systems and things like that. So can you build on that? What obstacles do tribal nations encounter when they're striving for authentic representation? And again, I'll just open it up to whoever wants to take that first.
I guess I got the microphone, so I'm good at talking, I guess. So capacity is a huge thing. And so there's over 570 federally recognized tribes, and a lot of people sometimes gravitate towards some really big stuff going on. Heck, the Cherokees doing like film studio stuff, and like you got Killers of the Flower Moon with the Osages, you got all kinds of these big stuff, but like what we have to recognize is that the vast majority of the tribes are not big tribes. And the vast majority of the tribes would like to assert their sovereignty and take control of their own narratives and build their own systems. And I always love in Indian country, we got sovereignty, we can do what we want. Let's do it, all right, let's go. All right, where's the money, and does anybody know how to do that? And so like you have a situation where the capacity, there's a desire, but there's a lack of capacity in several fronts. In resources, not every tribe is gaming. Resources, and even if you're good, even if you have access to federal grants, they lob out, they say like, oh yeah, well, these are treaty promises, and then they lob out like $10 million for 570 tribes to compete over, and then slice it up into $400,000 each to go change the entire health landscape of their community. And so like the technical knowledge on how to navigate systems, the resources to do so, the norms and capacities that are built over time, a lot of tribes are missing. And so a lot of tribes would like to assert themselves and build their own systems of media representation, schools, language programs, and all that stuff. But in reality, there's a lot of tribes that got a hold of a fund somewhere and found that speaker and said, here's a modest salary and a desk, go save our language. And it doesn't happen like that. And so that massive capacity gap, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we face.
And I'm glad that Haskell Indian Nations University is directly addressing that. So, you know, we have a media studies program. Amanda's, you know, dean of, you know, the college that oversees that. And of course, she's got, you know, her journalism experience to bring to students here. But one of the things I would share with people, and it's funny you asked this question, so Haskell is home to one of the largest National Science Foundation grant, which, knock on wood, has not been defunded, and called the Rising Voices Changing Coast Convergence Science Hub. And we have made, it's a national hub, but we're doing work in Shishmaref, Alaska, a community in the Big Island of Hawaii, Huialoha, working with some of the state recognized, but not federally recognized bands of Indians down on the Louisiana coast, and then with descendants of the Taínos in Puerto Rico. And we set out to use media as one of the ways that we would give the communities the power to tell their stories. And we're about a little over halfway through a 5-year project. Just had a big call this afternoon, and it's just beautiful. Media prices are going down. You can do a lot with media now because, you know, the technology is changing so rapidly. And so one of the things that we have included as a part of our science is to empower the native indigenous knowledge holders to be co-producers of science with us, honor, recognize the knowledge and wisdom they bring to understand what is going on their coastal homelands. And we're giving them cameras and equipment to tell their stories. And I think that that is an excellent example of, you know, the point, you know, that Alex was just making. I've got some concerns with certain kinds of media and technologies today, but if we can get, you know, technology in the hands of these young, bright, energetic people, I think, you know, that can be a very powerful thing, and I'm looking forward to what we might see in the next decade as a result of, you know, activities like that. So I just wanted to share that with you all.
I was just gonna say that one of the things that, as Native people, is acknowledgement of, you know, the past atrocities that have happened to us, but also to try and work through those in a healthy way. And I think one of those has been the boarding school coalition. You know, September is known to honor the boarding school survivors. They're having a National Day of Remembrance on September 16th in DC. September 30th is the, you know, Wear Orange Day, Wear Orange Shirt Day, to remember boarding school survivors, but also to acknowledge that these atrocities happened here on this campus. And so, like, I know talking about that is really difficult with our students who may not even realize that trauma is going to be passed down to you. And when I was teaching class, I no longer teach class anymore, but I would let people know that, you know, you may not feel that trauma now, but you may feel it later when you learn about your elders and what they may have had to go through. But acknowledging the pain that they went through and acknowledging the pain that these kids that are in our cemetery had to go through, and those that we don't know where they're buried on this campus. That is a real truth. A lot of people don't want to acknowledge. And, you know, even the city, when they're building the South Orange Traffic Way and continuing to expand into the wetlands, That's the truth they don't want to think about. You know, this problem that people thought that Indians were a bad thing, and then, you know, trying to change who we are. And now we're realizing, you know, oh, we need to make sure they're remembered and the survivors are remembered. You Haskell students are all survivors of those ancestors. You were not meant to be here. You know, think about that. And so I think acknowledging the trauma that happened to our people through boarding schools and this school, and I think the city needs to acknowledge that as well. Make a bigger impact, maybe say something more, and try and get more people to educate themselves about the history of the school.
Great, does anybody else want to pick up on that?
One quick thing they were talking about, you know, reservation dogs and media and how things, something I see today, and I think it's a powerful thing, and I saw it with reservation dogs, but I've seen it with some other programs that as Native people, bringing people along with us on our successes, right? What Sterling was able to do to bring in several different people, not just the actors, but people to write with him, but I've seen it at other places, and so I think that's an important thing is, as we get a step in those doors, push that thing open and bring as many people in as we can, and bring people with us to those spaces. So I just think that's a really important thing that I see.
Thank you. Anybody else want to take that question or move on? Okay, so you're starting to talk about things like greater awareness, you know, whether it be through media, you know, television programming, maybe news stories, maybe having the city of Lawrence be more of an advocate to represent a fuller truth of the history of the city, and of course that includes Haskell. So media is one way, and that obviously has a big impact on us. So maybe you have other examples of how media can be used as a tool for cultural preservation, empowerment, or education about Indigenous communities, but maybe you have other ideas. Maybe there are individuals or organizations that you know about. So the question is really, you know, how do we bring to bear different kinds of tools, you know, to harness those priorities of cultural preservation, of empowering the Native voice or perspective, and educate about Indigenous communities. Does that stump you?
So, like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a part of an internship up at KU. It's actually a kind of a newer collaboration that has come about in the past 5 years. Good Morning Indian Country started off with the Lawrence Art Center, and it kind of snowballed into something a lot greater than that, and became offered as an internship to me. And when I first came into that space, you know, I didn't have really any knowledge about, you know, the news, journalism. I didn't have any knowledge of that, but I did know who I was as a Native person, as a young lady, and, you know, those kind of values that come with being a tribal citizen. And that was enough for me to find a passion in telling stories and storytelling and learning about how our tribes have used oral tradition throughout the years and throughout centuries, and how they have preserved our language and our stories and our way of life and how we treat one another. And so I thought that was really powerful. And so on Good Morning Indian Country, we take stories from all over Indian country, whether that be, you know, coast to coast, Alaska. We cover all of it. We don't see Native people as just one. We see us as individuals, and individual people who have different ways of storytelling and different issues. We cover the good, the bad, the funny, the exciting, and that's really something that I'd like to see more in the mainstream society. I'd like to see think people like Native news anchors and Native sports insiders and Native photographers, those kind of things are, they should be normalized. It should be a normal thing to see our people in those positions. And I think that when people do see our news program, it gives them a sense of pride in who they are as a Native person. And I think it's that leadership that will really start to develop over time and, you know, hopefully inspire the younger generation to want to be seen in those kind of spaces. And the stories that we share can really teach people, non-natives outside of our communities, kind of what kind of things that matter to us.
Yeah, so, I'll try real, I sit on a lot of boards here in Lawrence and in the community, with Douglas County, Lawrence Chamber of Commerce, Douglas County Food Policy Council, just a lot of different things. So, and it's an honor to sit on those to represent Haskell. But sometimes I'm the only person of minority representation at those tables, at those meetings, and that's something that I've openly talked with people from the communities. They recognize it, and so, you know, again, we as, you know, we have some community members, whether it's school board members or things like that, that are Native, that are on Lawrence School Board, you know. So I think, you know, we need more, but it is a lot to ask of somebody to step up to those things, you know, and I think that's one thing that, as a Native population and minority in general, when you have opportunities, you gotta take the seat at the table. And it's not just your seat, it's the whole community that's behind it. And so when somebody asks me to join a board, that's one of the things I try to do is like, yes, or I try to get somebody else to take that seat. Because I know how important it is to get that seat, get it offered to me, but, and I want us to be represented at every seat that we can, every table that we can. And so, you know, to have those representations, and it's not, you know, it's not to say that any organization that I talk to is against that. It's not. It's sometimes we didn't know who. You know, it's the same thing with Lawrence Public Schools. When they called me to do a cultural presentation in Eudora Public Schools, and they said, you know, used to we had somebody that was non-Native that would come do this, and I'm like, you got over 1,000 Native Americans sitting in Haskell, and you're telling me you couldn't get somebody to come do a cultural presentation? Like, this will never happen again. You can call me, and I'll either find somebody. But that's the thing, is like, you're talking to the wrong person, you know, or you're not into it. And so we have to, you know, it's not just, I think that's one thing that we have to work on ourselves too. Some of it's us fixing our processes and our abilities to say that it's okay for us to take that opportunity when it's given to us. You know, too many times we thought, oh, that's just a token seat at that table. I don't care if it's a token seat or not. I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna make it my seat, and I'm gonna make it more people's seat if I can. And so I think that's kind of the approach that I looked at with the local stuff and things, but where I keep going, so. I get a little preachy.
Yeah.
This guy's my boss over here, so. Literally, my boss. Aside from media representation, which has been booming lately for us, it's really helpful. Lawrence Times folks here always taking care of us.
Yeah.
Got one with Molly over here. No, I think as Native people, when we are ourselves, but we also are coming at the things we do in community and relationships, that has been very powerful in getting us the end goal. And for me, that's really been helpful, because when you are that only person somewhere, you need others to help or be around. Because, you know, we're each called on a lot to do different things, and sometimes you have to say no, but most times you try to say yes. And what I've seen lately is also that community and relationship building go beyond our Native people, but as we continue to work with our non-Native folks, that that see how important our values and our culture is, and they bring that into the work they do. And when you think about media, right, we have a professor here, Deidre, you out there, I think I saw you, Deidre Bex, who is a non-native but has done a lot of great work making sure that the native actors and actresses and storytellers and directors are part of her films. And that's inspiring, right, because she's not the only one, we have lots of other people. And there's a lot of you here today that I've seen at numerous events, and you know, you're seen, we see you, and that helps us break down our defense mechanisms and our barriers, because they're there. When I get an email for someone asking for help, I'm thinking like, who are they, what do they want? But also working through what that means and how we can be helpful. And actually Dr. Redcorn here does a really good job of that, because I'm always like skeptical, and he's over here trying to help folks, probably just like Mackie here, working with the Eudora schools, which is my school district and where my kids go, so I better make sure they get in contact with Mackie again.
And I might just add, there's so much that just think bigger than the grant. Because Indian country is so used to, oh, there's this grant, there's this grant, there's this grant, which is why the inbox gets filled up with another grant and another grant. We're looking for somebody to join us on this grant. It's due in 3 hours. But, so the grant, but I did that to you recently. However, my bigger point was that we gotta go further upstream and like prioritize relationships first, and relationships built around what the purpose of, so if we're talking from a KU Haskell standpoint, the well-being of our communities and our students, and that's native and non-native, all right? And so can we partner, and what can we partner with? And I think if you focus on the relationships first and start there and build up, and then when they're not answering your email and you got a hold of their cell phone, you text them. And I'm joking here because that works sometimes, but they know who you are.
Yeah, right.
You've done things together, you've collaborated together, you've been doing it for years. It's not just you show up and like, hey, we need a letter for this grant. That's not a relationship. And so the point being, like, when we come back and I look at, like, I showed up in Lawrence as an undergrad, and I hadn't had, because I had gone to school most of my life in Kansas City area, I didn't have like Indian stuff happening in school unless we were invited to do some drum and feather presentation type stuff, and we were the white looking kids that were Osage and had funny last names, and so we pranced around, you know, stood up there and did the cultural presentations that lots of families do. So we did that, but then I went to school and then started joining First Nations Student Association, and for anybody that's been around Lawrence, Dr. Cornell Peebleward, he's like, hey, come on over to my house, let's sing. And so we come over and we're singing, and I'm like, this is like the first time I've ever been in like I have somebody in my educational institution, like taking me out of that and doing this other form of education. And he gave us these tapes that were from Morris Lookout. Osage Singer was his mentor. So he's Comanche, and we're sitting there and we're doing Osage songs. And I was like, well, this is like something that I am loving. But then if you fast forward and I get a job at KU, and me and Mackie are talking about a friend of ours that we used to sing with and be around there and lost a toe in a scooter accident. But what happened is that relationship starts to get rekindled. And then all of a sudden it starts multiplying and multiplying. And so the multiplication of relationships, so if you lead with relationships now and you do the typical like, well, what's this gonna be 20 years from now? That's where that capacity building happens. And it's way bigger than a grant. It's a grant is like in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th seat of priorities, and the relationships and how you be with people and learn with others, that starts to take that precedent. And that turns into something completely different over time. And that's why that's I think why we have a mixture of KU and Haskell folks on the stage right now.
I'll just add to that too is that one of the things that I've seen in the past few years with Haskell and KU that I really am proud of is those relationships growing. One of the things that some young people here at Haskell came to me and I was with the USDA extension program, and they wanted to do a fashion show and make their own stuff. And so we had these classes, they made their skirts, they made all this stuff, then we had a fashion show. I didn't know what was going on. But then KU was like, let's put it on the spotlight, and they made it an even bigger fashion show up there and brought it up to Hill. And then, you know, the Spencer Museum posted on it. So those relationships expanded that one little idea of us doing it, and it just got bigger and bigger. And now it's something that like is an annual thing, and we have students that are going to New York City to model, and I'm like okay, but that's how that happens. It's just exposure, like putting that opportunities out there and having those things. So it's pretty cool, I thought.
Other responses? Well, let's talk about something a little bit different, maybe more personal. As I said at the outset of the program tonight, we have a really rich representation of many different nations and communities across Indian country here tonight. So when we're thinking about accurate representation, I think there probably is a personal aspect to that, something that you feel passionate about. So the question is, what's a key message or an insight about your own nation, about your own experience that you want non-Native people to understand? Because as educators, I think that might be a really good starting point to help people get past some of those uncomfortable questions and landmines and things like that. Yeah, so what's a key message or insight about you, your own nation, that you would like non-Native people to understand?
I guess I'll go first. My grandma really is Cherokee. She really is. But I think something I want people to understand is that, you know, yeah, we're humorous, we talk about, you know, things, but there really is more behind it to my culture, to who I am, and I'm proud of that, you know, and the fact that I put myself in different positions and different places to learn those things, because I told that was what that's who we are, you know, who are we without those things? And I'm still learning. You still learn. You learn forever. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand is, you know, hey, we didn't all have the opportunity, and that's the beautiful thing about Haskell too, is there's students from all over. And some of them didn't grow up in a traditional cultural way. They grew up, you know, in an urban area or something away from their tribe. But they come here and they start to learn about themselves. Some of them come here to learn about themselves. And that's really, you know, being an encouragement. And I think, you know, from an education standpoint, working with several different tribal TCUs and tribal communities throughout this country, one of the things that I found is you know, my job as an educator is a lot of helping people with their self-esteem to build up their self. Tell them it's okay to take this opportunity. It's okay for you to do this. It's your right. It's your, you know, we say that it's your right, but it's also it's okay for you to do it. And I think that's the thing people have been waiting to say, you know, because before we had to get the okay, right? Agency had to give us permission to go do that or spend that dollar or whatever. So we got to wait on somebody to give us permission all the time. We don't have to wait on that anymore. And I think that's empowering. And to empower our students to say, you know, hey, you can do it. And that's why I stay in higher education. Is because those students, when they come to us at 18 years old, they're not the same when they leave, man. And that's the beautiful thing, because they've grown into a person that I know is going to go out there and be successful and contribute to any country as a whole and build us up. And that's really, I think, the key to strengthening our Native communities and building them. And so my message is just really, like, you know, is as a people, we'd be proud of who we are, stand up, educate people, and you know, and support one another. You know, be a supporter of one another, and I think that's gonna help all of us in the long run.
Yeah, so it'd be hard to kind of distill down a single point, but I think we've kind of touched on it already. You know, what I try to embody in my teaching, maybe imperfectly, but try to embody in my life, is something that I heard a lot of people who never had initials after their name talk about. You know, aunties, uncles, grandmas, grandpas from many of our different nations. And it comes down to this, that, you know, and we've touched on it tonight, and if there's, and this is a lesson not just for Indigenous people, this is a lesson I think humankind could benefit from greatly now, but I'll distill it this way. In my Zoyaha traditions, my Yuchi traditions, if you ever went to our grounds and our traditional chief would get up and talk, you're less likely to hear a lecture about our inalienable rights. You're likely to hear a lecture about our unalienable responsibilities we have. And we have responsibilities, not just to our human relatives, but we have responsibilities to all the natural relatives that are a part of this beautiful blue-green Mother Earth. And so what I would like to suggest is we need to recalibrate how we think about wealth in this country, because I know a lot of poor rich people. They don't have any relatives. I'd rather be rich in relatives than rich in resources. And I think that's a kernel of just such incredible wisdom, and I think it resides in a lot of our communities and nations and families. And so that's one of the themes I try to talk to my students about. You know, as long as you're rich in relatives, you won't have to worry about the resources. That'll kind of take care of yourself. That's why I'm so glad we got good KU relatives up here, because, you know, we make good relations, we get some good things done, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I was actually gonna say something like that, just not as sophisticated, with years of experience and wisdom, Dr. Wildcat. Something that takes me back to Oprah's show when I was younger. Someone came to the Navajo Nation, and, you know, it was on TV, and it was an Oprah show, so I was watching it. And basically was talking about how we were in poverty and everything was so bad, and I was like, seriously? That's where I lived. I mean, I lived in that shack that probably didn't have insulation and whatever. But to his point, wealth looks different, and we still live that way. I mean, my family, thankfully my grandfather can build homes and taught us that, but that's how we live, but it's not poverty to us. That's not the important part of the life, right? Some of the important parts of our lives are athletics. Athletics on our reservation and many other reservations is huge. We have Res Ball on Netflix that came out, and it's just a show that we all love to watch. But athletics is something huge, and so why also Haskell brings a lot of us here. I mean, that's what brought me to Haskell Volleyball. And for those of you that are here in town and know this place, I want to give a shout out, because someone who depicts a strong Navajo woman is Representative Haswood, who's here. She'll always be Representative Haswood to me. But when you see her and her grace on TikTok and her dances, but just the way she dresses and the way she carries herself as a Navajo woman, you know, that is who we are, and we are strong people. So we might look like we live in poverty, but there's so much wealth in the culture and in the things we do together as a community that really brings us up, and in a way, right, and then we want to give back and be part of the solution. So
Way to put it, Dr. Wildcat. Give you some examples.
Anybody else want to address that question about, personal kind of messages from your life or experiences, your nation, that you want non-native people to understand?
Yeah, so where I'm from is known as the oldest continuously inhabited city in the United States, probably the world. We've always been there, we've never been moved. And so I grew up in our land, we had no electricity, we had no running water. We had to go get our water from a cistern and take it back to the house. And I just remember being a kid and it was so heavy and it was just like, oh, I hate this. Why can't we have running water? But as you get older, you realize like how important that is and what it teaches you, and how important everything that we do where I'm from. And I think one of the best things I learned from my elders, I grew up a lot around my grandmother, uncles, my aunts. And when we would have our ceremonies, which are closed off to non-natives, and now they've closed them off to a lot of other tribal nations. Like you have to be accurate to come. We just don't want anything going out on social media. And so one of the things that I was taught during these ceremonies is that you're not supposed to be thinking bad thoughts or having bad thoughts. You're supposed to be just thinking good, positive things. But one of the things my grandmother always told us is that you're not only praying for yourself and your family, you're praying for the entire world. And I was just like, wow. And where we live on top of this mesa, we always have these tour groups that go around. And so that was kind of my first introduction to non-natives, seeing these tour groups. And it's funny to think about that you grew up having tourists look at your house and where you live. And every time they came around, my grandmother would always make us come inside because she didn't want them taking pictures of us. But then, her saying that is just like, you're supposed to pray for the entire world. And I, kind of was just like, okay, because like all these bad things that happen outside of our community, but we're praying to make those things better. And so I think with everything that's been going on this past week, all these bad things and like, yeah, it's things that we don't like to talk about or don't want to, start a fire. But we have to pray for people, everyone, to make sure they get through these hard times. And it's hard times for a lot of us. And so I always go back to that, thinking about my grandmother telling me this, that, we need to pray for the entire world. And really, we really do now. We do have to pray for the entire world.
And kind of extending off that, so one of my favorite terms, and people that know me are gonna be like, oh, here it goes again, is Gene Dennison wrote a book called Colonial Entanglement. And it's about the reconstitution of the Osage Nation. But the point being, the word entanglement for me was so helpful. Because as an educator and somebody that's like looking at systems of education and how do we we're literally at KU that is funded by tax dollars from land that was taken from the Osage Nation, and we're trying to indigenize things in a way that's culturally, so you can't parse that out ever. But there are two things that Osage culture emphasizes and others talk about, and the first one is like, the Osage are a forward-thinking people. One of our best traditions is we are forward-thinking people, and we're always adapting and moving forward in a good way. And sometimes you just have to let stuff go. And so there are parts of our culture that were let go, but it's done so in a strategic way. And so, I got oil jokes too.
Took my land with oil.
That's all right. Cherokees are on Osage land anyway. But always moving forward. I'm leaving. I'm also part Cherokee, so I don't know how to do it. So, well, that's obvious, it's an entanglement. But, a colonial entanglement. So, but wash con is another word they talk about, where it's like doing the best you can with what you got, and that's all anybody can ask. And that to me is, it lets you breathe a little bit, because you're like, man, like, you show up in a situation, you're like, man, that person's like, they're fluent in their language, and they're like a young elder in their tradition. I'm going through all this school, and like, who the hell am I? I'm this white-looking kid that like, I mean, I think I'm Osage, but I mean, when you're a kid, you go through those types of things. You're like, where am I? Where do I fit in all this? And so that doing the best you can with what you got allows you to just be like, we inherited a bunch of entangled-ish. And sometimes all we can do is like, well, what's the small thing that we can do right now to start kind of moving forward on that? And so I think that's a really important Osage kind of teachings. And also the other thing is like Indian humor. And with that being said, like, I think it's really important that people know that the Osage Nation is the best tribe. And all these Okie Indians, most of them are hanging out in Osage territory as squatters, just like Little House on the Prairie.
We also paid for that art show.
See it? Yeah. You guys like that stadium? Yeah. You want oil jokes? Guess you don't want money to renovate that stadium.
We're on YouTube, guys.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I mean, like that, like it.
Oh,
Yeah, there you go. Go ahead, Jimmy. Go tell everybody how awesome those things are.
on that same note, I was gonna keep mine short. Topeka is an Osage word, right? And then, not all Osages get oil money, so that's why. That's why I say that. That's that.
So, shit, what was the question again?
So, anything that you want to share about your own nation, your own values, your own experiences that, you'd like non-Native people to understand, because I think that's part of our question of representation. How do we accurately represent ourselves and our nations?
So kind of circling back to what Ms. Lovato was talking about earlier, the boarding school era. That is something that's highly prominent in my life as a 21-year-old student here. Learning about that is really fulfilling to me because it helped me understand, myself. I come from about 4 or 5 generations of boarding school survivors. My last name, Levering, actually originated from Carlisle. And it took my own research, personal research, through working through my tribal newspaper to uncover that truth. And that was really powerful for me. So it made me want to research more and more into the boarding school era. And it turns out that my family, the Leverings, they were like model students up at Carlisle. They did really good to conform. And they stayed at that school for generations, and then they kind of moved, when the relocation happened to the Ho-Chunks from Wisconsin to southern area in Nebraska, my family kind of stayed around that area, and there were also other boarding schools. Genoa Indian Boarding School is where my grandmother went to school. My mother and father met at Flandre Indian Boarding School, and so I'm a direct product of that. I'm also a product of the relocation because I'm half Winnebago, Ho-Chunk, and half Omaha, which is actually the Haga dialect related to the Osage, so I understand what you meant by Washkong, so yeah. And it's that kind of knowledge came from, this curiosity that many young people have. And I think that's really important, especially coming here to Haskell, it being a past boarding school, a past institution. You feel those relatives, like what Wildcat said, we're related to everything, the nature, plants. And learning that perspective in his class really made it all make sense for me, made me understand why I am here at the time that I'm here. And it's really fulfilling to be able to get a really quality education and learn things that I'm really actually interested in here, things that benefit me and that I'll teach to my children for generations and generations, really comes full circle. And just like me, there are many other people in my generation who are going to learn these truths about themselves and uncover those things and be able to share that with their peers and kind of find a sense of healing and that sense of community by knowing these things that happened to us in the past and using those experiences to make a better future for our young ones and for the next coming 7 generations. So yeah, just to be mindful that we're all different, we all come from different backgrounds. Generational trauma is a very real thing, and to understand it is to, start that healing foot forward.
Wonderful, yeah.
Oh, no.
Okay, yeah, so those are fantastic perspectives, give us a lot to think about, thank you. So when, I want to give a shout out to Travis Campbell, who's the director of our Haskell Cultural Center and Research Museum. He's the one who put this panel together tonight. He did a lot of work and he made sure that, facilities came over and got the temperature nice in here and got all the chairs set up and everything looks so good. So really want to, if we could, just give a round of applause. And one of the things that I think, in terms of representation, speaking personally, that Haskell as an institution can always do better with. Maybe all institutions can do a better job of this, but we want to communicate things, in a very clear and amplified way, so that you're aware of events like this, so that you feel welcome. If you're not a Haskell student or a Haskell alum or part of Lawrence Native community, we welcome everyone here, and we want you to come to these events. And we love that you're out on the art market, of course, but it's great to have these other kinds of discussions. And so again, please know that you are welcome. And the reason I bring up communication is because I'm not a social media guy either, Dan. I'm kind of a Luddite. I'm surprised that a microphone or something hasn't blown up on me so far this evening, because that happens pretty regularly. So kudos on the tech as well, Travis. But the Cultural Center has a Facebook presence, and I don't know what else you all might do, but when Travis put this together, he asked through that platform that if anybody wanted to submit questions in advance, they could. And so we have a few of those, and I'm going to try to kind of do what I do all the time in class when I'm running out of time, which is to find a really intriguing way to bring synthesis to them and draw them all together. So bear with me, it might be a little bit long-winded, but I'll try to encapsulate some of what these questions we're getting at. And basically, they're asking, and to some extent you've addressed it, how can media and education best amplify authentic Indigenous voices to challenge the misrepresentations that are still out there, foster a more, representative kind of identity? And put another way, maybe you want to talk about your own work. In some cases it's in the classroom. In some cases you're working with these ubiquitous grants that you all mentioned. Some of you have broadcast journalism experience who are up here. Maybe you have an example you can think of where there are improvements that have been made in the accuracy of depictions or portrayals of Native people. You folks, somebody mentioned reservation dogs and some of the other TV programs and films and things that are out there as well, and so forth. So that's a lot to unpack, I know, but if you think about maybe how can improvements be made? Are there improvements that you're seeing? Or what do you do in your own kind of orbit to try and promote those better or more accurate representations?
I think one of the things that here at Haskell is to keep building our multimedia programs. Love to, I've seen the power that a simple camera can do for a student in multiple different ways, whether that's video or photography. It just gives it, and I think that's the thing, is the opportunities and tools to put in the younger generation's hands, because they grew up with this stuff. You know, they're making videos on their phones and stuff. My phone was a rotary phone, so I didn't have it. And so we're just at a different time, and making sure that these students understand that you know, they have these opportunities to put them in there. The other thing is that, from an institution standpoint, is to you know, to educate people and keep inviting the public to things like this. You know, yeah, we used to talk about everybody coming out for the powwow, which there's one on the 26th, and then there's a on the 27th, 28th, there's a buffalo harvest. Come watch how Indians. And the buffaloes will be overseen by the Osage Nation, by a generous donation. Thank them, they're feeding us. But with other things, you know, whether it's a sewing class or all these different cultural things, are things that we're bringing to help educate not only our students but also the public. You know, there's a reason why we do things, and understanding it's not just sewing, right? There's a reason behind this ribbon skirt. There's meaning behind it, and so understanding that's part of it. We've been working with a committee right now to see how we're going to respond to the World Cup, right? You know, have all of these people coming in from all these different countries. How's Haskell respond? Well, to me, Haskell responds through education, educating people about us, right? We invite them out here to understand who we are. And so those opportunities that we're working on, you know, with the Cultural Museum and also with academics, and, you know, having some presentation things and different opportunities to invite these people into Haskell. Because there's one thing about Haskell that I truly believe in, is I can't tell you how special it is. You got to come here and feel it. You got to come here and put your boots on the ground, because it's just that special of a place. You don't understand it until you're here, and something brings us back here. You can feel it. But yeah, that's what.
Good. So what do we do to ensure accurate representation?
Yeah, and what do you do, maybe in your own work, to ensure those accurate representations? What suggestions could you make to those in the media or other people who are working to educate, to amplify those authentic representations?
I sell Indian names. So
Authentic.
200. I think just doing this kind of stuff, you know, it's, as an educator, I've been asked, you know, to go and talk to different organizations, as I'm sure folks here have. And I think it's just being able to, I guess, have a certain amount of dedication to that. Because it can be really easy to say, well, I don't want to do it. I'm just going to go to the house, you know. But I think deep down within Native educators, there's this, you know, need, and there's recognizing a need that there is somebody to be there, whether it's at a museum or it's with some organization who wants to ask you, like, for your input, and then being able to provide that. Because, you know, if you don't, there might be somebody out there who's not going to provide that accurate representation, you know. And I think that's kind of a big thing now when we talk about, like, quote-unquote pretendians and that kind of stuff, right? So I think as Native educators, it's, you know, almost a responsibility to be in those spaces to provide, you know, answers as best we can based on our own experience, to be able to capture those narratives and be in control of the narrative. And a lot of that means, you know, giving up time with your family, or giving up time, you know, to go hang out. You know, so there's been times when I've been, you know, done stuff. So I think just in my own time, in my own work, it's being willing to do stuff outside of the normal, you know, classroom work, which that in itself is a lot too. Because a lot of things we talk about, you kind of, you know, it gets deep and it could be, you know, hard to talk about, but, you know, to do it and then get invited to do something, hey, on a Saturday, you might not want to, but you know, sometimes, but then you do it, you know. That's the way I do it, that's why I do it, so.
We've been building at the University of Kansas because when you go there, it's huge, lots of non-native folks, and every time you say you're native, they're like, oh, you're from Haskell. We're like, yes, we love Haskell and that's our community, but no, we're not from Haskell, we actually work here or go to school here. So one of the ways that we've been really pushing is building visibility, and we actually have used our powwow to build that visibility, right? Because the powwow attracts people, but at the same time, it's not just about dancing Indians out there. It's like, how do we teach more about what that means? And we put on this powwow, most of us don't even powwow, so we have to ask those that do, who have the expertise. But we've built the Indigenous Cultures Festival around the powwow to educate and bring presenters, but also to do workshops. Because also as Native people here, there's a lot of us that are in this community, and we stay here because of what we feel as Natives, being around other Natives, but I don't get to practice my culture that is in Arizona, and a lot of it you have to be there. So when we get to put on these workshops or have others teach basket weaving or finger weaving, which is, you know, from different tribes, that's the learning, the community that we get to bring together. And it's through grants that do that, right? Humanities Kansas, which I think is part of this work here, but also NEA, National Endowment Association, that helps fund some of that, the TGT grant from the city. So a lot of bits and pieces of funds put all of those things together. So that's kind of something we've been doing at the University of Kansas over the last like 8-9 years, and it's really been helpful to help us build what we do have now at KU, and we have an associate vice chancellor position that has a very important seat at a table to push some of the things forward that we've been doing.
And we have an associate vice chancellor position because I just got to show up from down the road, and because a lot of people made room for the associate vice chancellor position that took decades of work, and there's other people in the audience too. And so the longevity of the work, I think, is something that we have to take seriously, and you're not going to get, you're going to get quick bursts here and there, but the most effective work is a patient persistence over time that challenges systems one part at a time. And I work with a lot of teachers in professional development contexts, and one of the things I point out, because you have to picture, okay, when we say education and we say media, you have to picture teachers rely heavily on media. Textbooks, children's books, they play on what's going on in the media to try to draw connections for students. All the things that are happening through the learning process has media, or there's a medium in some way that the teacher's trying to channel. And so you picture an anemic media with narrow stereotypes about American Indians. So children's books, there's a statistic that talking bears outnumber natives 9-to-1 in children's books. Berenstein bears, so you're more likely to encounter talking bears in your children's books. And then 87% of all social studies standards about American Indians in the state level standards across the United States are in a pre-1900 context. So 87% by design of what they're supposed to know is Indians stopped living after 1900. So then you add on the fact that research on textbooks have the same issues because textbooks are built around the state standards. And so you have this compounding thing, and then what happens on Friday night? The football game, and then Saturday football game, and then Sunday football game, particularly in the Kansas City area. And if you have mascots in those contexts, and even if it's other schools, those mascots are teaching and reinforcing those same stereotypes, and then you're back at school on Monday. And by the way, your teacher didn't learn much to teach you about modern Indians either, because they were taught to teach what was in those systems. And then your principals weren't taught much about it either. So you have an entire systemic issue. So that's how I came to this conversation, is through education and teacher skills and the realization that we have a really big kind of systemic issue. But if you zoom out and you start to think, the state dictates what teachers are trained to do at a state university, and tribes are not in this conversation. So the teachers and the amplifiers of the learning are ill-equipped, and when they show up and they look at the materials available to them, you're still looking at Dancing with Wolves and Last of the Mohicans to teach about these things, all right? So, and yes, those moved the needle, but the point being.
They're still good movies.
Yeah, Grant Green, rest in peace, yeah. I know. That soundtrack too. All right, anyway. The point being, the systems issues, so we have to recognize that what has to go into solving that is across professions. So like, the children's book needs an artist and a writer. We need media people behind the soundboard and the camera. We need people that know how to do splits in YouTube. We need people that know how to put it on social media and navigate social media. And so you have to consider every workforce development avenue that's feeding the workforce. If tribes are not in the influence of what is being taught in all of those professional programs, then all those represent missed opportunities. And so one at a time, trying to identify those things is really important.
So very quickly, so first of all, I tell many in this audience, because I know as my grandmother would say, I'm preaching to the church choir, the people who really need to hear what we're talking about didn't come tonight. You know, they've got something else they're doing. And that's all right, but you're here. And so first of all, I want to thank those of you in the Lawrence community who have stepped up post the St. Valentine's Day massacre at Haskell on February 14th, when we had many of our faculty and employees terminated. I mean, they got a call, they got an email in the morning, you know, you're ready to turn your stuff in, you're done at 5 o'clock Friday. And the community has responded in an incredible way. Keep that kind of support up. We need that support, and think of it this way. Here's the bright spot I always like to say, is, you know, there's this apocryphal quote everyone attributes to Einstein. There's no evidence Einstein ever said this, but you can find it, it'll get attributed to him all the time. And it goes something like this: remember, you can't fix problems with the same kind of thinking that created them. I think we need a generation of indigenous thinkers on this planet. And I really believe that this generation that's here right now is going to be an important, very important player in the future of what, you know, not only, you know, this homeland place looks like, but the planet looks like, because there are indigenous people around the planet who still have a recollection, some who even still practice ancient knowledge and wisdom that we desperately need now. So keep supporting and investing in that. If you happen to believe like I do, I don't think we should keep trying the same things that we've been trying over and over, because they're not working too well. We need a different way of approaching problems. And I'm just honored to be at a place where we can hold up people that have different worldviews, understanding, and some real knowledge, and thankfully some wisdom. And I think that's what Haskell is all about.
So I know for my organization, you know, we're out there protesting and we could use some more allies. So my friend and foe, my friend who is, you know, part of this, Galen Krauser, she's the executive director of the Kansas City Indian Center, is here. And she's out there with me, and she brought a whole bunch of our t-shirts that say nope on them, and racism, KC.org on the back. So you want to go grab one and spread the word. We're having our first protest October 19th at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I know there's going to be tons of people out there, but again, boots on the ground. You will see the hatred You know, the racism that comes with us when we're out there. It's amazing how mean people can be at 10 o'clock in the morning. But, so we're gonna be doing that October 19th and then November 23rd, because they usually have a Native American Heritage Month honoring, and so we usually try and go out there as well to make sure they know they're not honoring us. And so if you'd like to join us, we have a whole bunch of stuff posted. We have a flyer out there with the barcode that you can scan and get information and updates on what we're doing if you'd like to join us. I believe in allies. I know we can't do this on our own. And we welcome everybody to join us. And also, I don't know if you guys know, I do a radio show in Kansas City on Sundays, 5 o'clock. I'll be doing a show this Sunday on boarding schools and, you know, remembering the survivors. But I always, you know, make sure I know that not all the people listening to my show are Native people. And I know those people who are tuning in are learning and they're getting educated. And for me, as an educator, that's the one thing I always want to make sure people know about Native people, that we're still here. And, you know, we're still trying to educate people.
Okay, show of hands, who has Facebook?
I can't see out there.
Yeah.
Old people.
Okay, now I know you guys are awake, just checking. So, good morning Indian country, since we're shameless plugging up here. Everyone take out your phone and please follow Good Morning Indian Country on Facebook. You'll actually get to see, if you scroll back, you'll get to see a preview of what's gonna be going on. We actually did a story on Not in Our Honor, and we have video footage and real-time interviews with some of those people that were on the front lines during those protests. And so if you're interested in attending Ms. Lavaldo's thing, I highly suggest you check it out. You'll also get to see some things like the powwow, KU powwow. We did extensive live stream coverage on that. You could actually watch the powwow start to finish, or check out our news program, and we showed all of the highlights and the things that you really don't want to miss from that powwow. They're on our page. Other things, Haskell happenings. We have lots of events that happen here on campus, and these are opportunities for our community to bring themselves together. And as young people, we kind of organize ourselves, and so a lot of those things don't really get too much mainstream coverage, but Good Morning Indian Country is there to fill those coverage gaps. So I highly suggest, if you're interested in seeing the impact, the boots on the ground, check out our news program. That's what it's there for. And if you have any suggestions, please reach out to us. And Dr. Melissa Greenblatt here in the audience, just want to thank her for helping us out here so far and taking us this far with the program that she's doing. So thank you. And yeah, it's been really great sitting alongside so many of my teachers here. It kind of makes me feel emotional as a young person to have this opportunity. So I just want to say, watch kind of each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. These are great insights, and thank you for taking place in our discussion tonight, bringing your expertise, your wisdom, your humor, your humility, all of those things that embody the traditions and the values of our diverse peoples. This is maybe not a shameless plug, but it's a plug of sorts. I'm teaching this class here at Haskell. I've taught it for about 4 years now on the boarding schools. And one of the things that we're getting into right now is how does traditional education look compared to what the education, the re-education, as I call it, that came along with colonization. And you know, it's kind of strange here at Haskell because we're a little bit of a hybrid sometimes. We're not like, well, you know, I wouldn't be standing up in front of a room when you're all sitting at desks, right? And same for this. This to some extent is a westernized concept of the kind of panel discussion, but I'm glad that you indigenized it so much. And I want to invite, you know, as best you are able, this great turnout we have tonight. You know, as you exit the stage, people may want to shake your hand or, you know, give a compliment or ask a question. And I know we've been sitting up here for an hour and 45 minutes, and that's a lot. But if you would just kindly, entertain those things as you wind down tonight. I want to thank Travis again. I want to thank
Travis.
I want to thank the Cultural Center and Museum, which he's the director. I want to thank Humanities Kansas that got mentioned earlier, because they were the ones that first reached out to us about doing this Americans exhibit. The Watkins Museum, which ended up hosting the exhibit as there were uncertainties that Dr. Dan referred to that unfolded earlier this year. And who else am I missing? Who else do I need? I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I want to thank all of our panelists, certainly. So we will be the food there, and I hope you all have a really nice rest of your evening and a wonderful weekend. I think this was a really worthwhile way to kick that off. So again, thanks for spending some time with us here tonight.
Just a little chunky. She's definitely eating the cat food, so. Yes, absolutely. Yes, actually. I know, what are you doing? Okay. You can also, or just send me an outfit. Okay. If it's on my calendar, I'll do it. What happened?